Hi there, and welcome to Literature Snacks, the set of videos where I provide an analysis of a literature masterpiece in roughly 15 to 20 minutes. Today, we're talking about Jane Austen and her most famous Pride and Prejudice. So, shall we go, Mr. Darcy? Idol and heroine of a lot of feminists and sometimes even spinster, Jane Austen is the symbol of a lot of things. Of female independence, right. Of romance and love stories, wrong. Of mannerisms and novels of manners, right. Of the Regency era, wrong. Let's see a bit more in detail this incredible woman who wrote some timeless classic and is still massively sold in bookshops and online. Jane Austen was born in 1775 in the Hampshire village of Steventon, where her father was the rector of a parish. Jane's father always encouraged the love of learning for their children, and Jane's family was able to provide her with a very good education. She was raised in a very stimulating context, as her father had a great network of relationship. It was called the minor gentry, people with certain fortune and estate, but far from the nobility that Oscar Wilde described in his Importance of Being Earnest. In spite of being known as the writer of romance, we know very little about her love life. We know she never married. We know she accepted to marry Harry's big widow, but then she changed her mind the morning after. There are rumors about someone with whom she falls in love, but then died soon after. Fact is that since she wrote a lot about love and marriages, people like to think that she herself had experienced love. But in reality, Jane's sister Cassandra censored and destroyed all Jane's letters after her death to protect her reputation. So the reality is, we don't know much about the fact that she died unmarried. Being a woman didn't stop Jane from writing and publishing anonymously, and in 1795 she published Sense and Sensibility. With no little difficulties, she then published Pride and Prejudice, not before publishing Mansfield Park, that had her establishing as an author, though anonymously. After Pride and Prejudice, she wrote Emma, and the two other novels we know from her were published after her death, Persuasion and Northanger Abbey. She died very ill at the age of 41, probably due to Addison disease, and she was buried in Winchester Cathedral. So let's have a look at the plot of Pride and Prejudice. Are you ready? Because this is gonna be long. The book opens up to a tumult in the village of Longbourn, as not far from there, the wealthy gentleman Mr. Bingley has moved. Mrs. Bennet, mother of 5 daughters, Jane, Elizabeth, Mary, Kitty, and Lydia, vividly hopes to marry one of her daughters to Mr. Bingley. Indeed, Bingley and Jane meet at a ball, and it looks like there's some mutual interests between the two. At the ball, there's also a friend of Mr. Bingley, Mr. Darcy, whose snobbish attitude brings him to be very rude to Elizabeth. Through the next social gatherings, Jane and Bingley grow closer, while Darcy finds himself attracted to Elizabeth despite his first impression of her. So he asked her to dance at a ball, but as she had overheard him calling her a second-rate the first time they met, she turns him down. The urgency to find a husband for at least one of the 5 daughters is well felt not just from Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, but also from the girls, as otherwise the estate of Mr. Bennet will end up in the hands of Mr. Collins, a distant cousin, as women couldn't have properties in inheritance. When Jane is invited to Netherfield at Mr. Bingley's estate, she gets wet on the way and consequently falls ill, and she is forced to stay overnight. Her sister Elizabeth, rushes to the estate and steps into the house muddly and completely unconcerned about her appearance. She leaves Mr. Bingley's sisters shocked, and as nasty girls as they are, they start to speak ill of her and Jane and about their status, not as high as theirs. But Mr. Bingley dismisses all the matter as he really likes Jane. Jane and Elizabeth stay at Bingley's estate for a couple of days, and when Jane gets better, they go back home, where they find Mr. Collins speaking to Mrs. Bennet, asking for Jane or Elizabeth's hand. Mrs. Bennet seems to be keen on letting him marry Elizabeth. At this point, a new character comes into town. A regiment of militia is staying in town, and the officer, Wickham, catches the favor of the two other Bennet girls, Lydia and Catherine. Elizabeth notices that Darcy and Wickham know each other, and since she likes Wickham more than she likes Darcy, she asks Wickham how does he know Darcy. Wickham explains that they grew up together and their fathers were really close. Mr. Darcy Sr. had promised Wickham a parsonage at his father's death, but when the day came, young Darcy refused to it. And this only made the dislike Elizabeth had for Mr. Darcy even bigger. The plot develops through social gatherings, and the next one is another ball at Netherfield Estate. Several things happen there. 1. Elizabeth ends up dancing with Mr. Darcy and she tries to have a conversation with him, but he proves himself a snob and nasty. 2. Mrs. Bennet says out loud that Mr. Bingley must be proposing to Jane soon, embarrassing herself. 3. Mary, little sister from the Bennet family, performs a song and plays the piano with the small detail that she's not good neither at playing piano nor at singing. At the end of the ball, the Bennet family has definitely lowered themselves in their general favor. Things could not probably go any worse, and yet they do. Mr. Collins proposes to Elizabeth, and when she refuses, her mother gets furious, although her father is quite impressed. Mr. Bingley goes to London, leaving Jane in a deep state of depression, as it also gets clear that a wedding proposal is not happening anytime soon. Elizabeth's friend, Charlotte, receives a proposal from Mr. Collins, and she accepts it by explaining lucidly that marriage is marriage. Later on, Elizabeth pays a visit to her friend Charlotte, now Mrs. Collins, and they pass a long time at Lady Catherine de Borough's estate, where, along with her unpleasant opinion, Elizabeth is also forced to stand Mr. Darcy's presence, as he is Lady de Borough's nephew. Now hear me out, because this is difficult. At Lady de Borough's salon, Elizabeth speaks with a cousin of Mr. Darcy. Through her, she finds out that Mr. Darcy is going around to say that he had successfully saved a friend of his from a wedding with a girl below his status. It doesn't take much to Elizabeth to realize that Mr. Darcy is the reason of her sister Jane's unhappiness. Completely unaware of Elizabeth's contempt for him, Darcy approaches Elizabeth when she's alone and he confesses his love and asks her to marry him. We now know Elizabeth that she won't spend the rest of her life with a man that she despises, no matter how much her family needs one of the girls to get married. And in fact, she turns him down, putting forward the appalling conduct he had toward her sister's relationship and Wickham. At this point, Mr. Darcy writes a letter to Elizabeth to explain herself, which she receives the following days. As for Mr. Bingley and Jane, Mr. Darcy explained that he didn't see any sign of being in love from Jane, and at the ball, her family had embarrassed themselves so much that was the only reason he advised Bingley against marrying Jane. Elizabeth recognizes that Jane's attitude might have seemed uninterested from the outside, and that it's all her family fault if Jane didn't have the wedding she desired. Mr. Darcy then continued and explains his history with Wickham. When Wickham's father died, he said that he didn't want a parsonage because he didn't want to become a priest. He asked for money instead, which Darcy gave him. Sometime later, though, he changed his mind and wanted the parsonage, which Darcy refused. So Wickham tried to seduce and elope with Mr. Darcy's sister, who was only a teenager. Even though Elizabeth now regrets her behavior with Mr. Darcy, she doesn't reply to the letter and gets back home. The mood at home is all but light, as the militia has been called back and Lydia is desperate. But she receives an invitation from a wife of an officer to accompany her to Brighton, and she is granted permission to go. On the other hand, Elizabeth receives an invitation from her uncle Mr. Gardiner to join them in their estate on vacation. Imagine how Elizabeth feels when she's told that they are going to visit Mr. Darcy's estate. She first makes sure that he is not at home. Then she takes a look at the property and regrets deeply having said no to Mr. Darcy's proposal. Darcy appears. Well, it's his home. And after an awkward moment between him and Elizabeth, he decides to introduce Elizabeth to his sister Georgiana. Elizabeth and Georgiana get along very well, but while they are at Pemberley, Darcy's estate, Elizabeth receives a message explaining that Lydia has eloped with Wickham. The elopement is a serious and scandalous event, as Wickham might not marry Lydia, and by doing that, she ruined the last hope for the family to have a daughter married to a gentleman and save their properties. When everything seems lost, especially because no one is able to find the couple in London, Mr. Bennet receives a surprising letter telling him that Wickham and Lydia are married and everything is fine. Mr. Bennet assumes that it was Mr. Gardiner with his money that responsible for fixing the situation. When Lydia and Wickham come visiting, everything is unexpectedly fine. They have no debts, and Wickham will be an officer in the army. When Lydia accidentally lets out that Darcy almost came to dinner and only Elizabeth hears that, she makes some inquiries upon her aunt and finds out that it was Darcy who had found the couple in London, paid for Wickham's debt, and got an army post for him. Bingley and Darcy then come visiting, and eventually Bingley proposes to Jane. Hallelujah! At this point, an unexpected visitor comes along, Lady Deborah, who not only makes nasty remarks on the Bennet's estate, but she also asks Elizabeth to make an oath to not marry Mr. Darcy as he is for her daughter. Elizabeth, being outspoken as she is, has no difficulties in turning down Lady Deborah. At this point of the book, everyone still has the first impression of Mr. Darcy, snob and haughty, but for Elizabeth. She is the only one who knows what he has done for her. When they manage to meet in private, she apologizes for what she said to him and accepts his marriage proposal. This surprises her parents, who declare her crazy and underline the fact that she hates him. But she firmly states that she doesn't hate him anymore and he was never the arrogant man that they thought. And so they get married along with Jane and Bingley, and everyone gets to live a very happy life. Ironically, or maybe not, Pride and Prejudice are a theme of the book that originally was entitled First Impression. In fact, pride blinds both Elizabeth and Darcy to their true feelings for each other. Darcy's pride makes him look at everyone with superiority, while Elizabeth's pride makes her believe so much in her ability to judge others that she doesn't want to revise her opinion. She is so blinded by her pride that she despises Darcy, ultimately a kind and good-hearted man, and admires Wickham, a liar and a philanderer. Prejudice is shown in the book as to the tendency to judge people basing on a preconception. Both Elizabeth and Darcy make a wrong assumption about motives and people's behavior. Austen makes a sharp critic to the society of the time, deeply driven by Pride and Prejudice, but she also expresses her opinion on how people should deal with these feelings. She clearly sends the message that no one is immune to pride, although it's possible to overcome it with a proper moral that can lead to a life of decency and kindness. As for Prejudice, she has clearly a softer opinion. Prejudice is described as something that it is always present in a person's moral development, so it's a stage. Something that can be overcome with reason and passion. Austen is very harsh on characters that refuse to overcome their prejudices, such as Lady Catherine, so obsessed with class, and Caroline, Bingley's sister. It's through this perspective that Austen operates her critique to a society with a complete lack of empathy and an attachment to appearance. This is the side of the author that is so appreciated even nowadays. Women couldn't have an opinion at the time, and if they had it, it would have been dismissed as unimportant. The Jane Austen managed to express her opinion to the whole England. With her particular and unique side of free indirect speech, the narrator offers an outside and inside perspective, giving the reader the possibility to see the action and a glimpse of what is happening inside the character's mind. Though the narrator is a third person and is omniscient, by intruding in the character's minds, Jane Austen becomes more of a secret confidant than just an author, a person that makes us feel safe as she can keep all our secrets. The characters anyway unveil themselves through their words and their actions. And another ability of Austen is showing how often their characters act naturally and awkwardly instead of perfect actor of a perfect love story. Although Austen shows a good degree of realism depicting society, she was also blamed to represent a small reality, a small world, her world. A certain section of upper class, taking into no consideration at all the lower classes. I don't know if we can blame her for this, as she genuinely described the world that she was living in. And if she just assumed that all the servants were simply happy to be servants, we can all agree that nobody is perfect. Or we can see it as a confirmation of her opinion, that nobody is immune to Pride and Prejudice. Because of the fact that Austen writes a lot about marriages and love, she is mistaken for a writer of romance. Too many times, in my opinion. It's true that she writes about marriages, but that's because marriage is a social goal. This is well shown in Pride and Prejudice through Mrs. Bennet's hysteria to marry her daughters. This is a world where women from the upper class couldn't work or make a career and support themselves, and at the same time they couldn't inherit anything. The Bennet sisters know very well that it's vital that at least one of them get married, and they know that the one who will get married will have to attend to all the other sisters because they won't be able to be independent. The Bennet sisters are trapped in a patriarchal society that has no consideration at all for them. Of course, Austen holds resentment toward this society as she decided not to get married and support herself through her writings. It's also due to say that she had brothers who helped her, a luxury that the Bennet sisters don't have. The urgency of getting married has nothing to do with Disney princesses in the 80s or the 90s that wanted to find their true love. This is an urge to not ending up as beggars with no home and no money. It's a rather an oppressive thought. If we watch this under this perspective, Elizabeth is a heroine that refuses to marry Mr. Collins because she doesn't want to trade the social stability and financial comfort with her independence. But we can also understand Mrs. Bennet's anger when she knows the news, as Elizabeth has condemned all of her sisters with this decision. Austen is not even a fan of love that conquers all or love at first sight, as we can clearly see her opinion on the matter through the characters of Lydia, who falls in love with Wickham and elopes with him, with the risk of ruining their reputation forever. Staying with Wickham without the benefit of marriage could threaten the entire Bennet family reputation, and it's only thanks to Darcy and his money that this doesn't happen. If Austen is very harsh with Lydia and her foolish conception of love, she is also very harsh with Charlotte, Elizabeth's friend, who marries Mr. Collins for mere reason of wealth and stability. As we said before, marriage is the only way women could achieve economic stability or even elevate themselves to a higher class. So Charlotte is doing the only sensible thing, accepting a proposal from a man, even if she deserves better, because she is growing old. And so, she is a victim of the society where she's living in. So why Austen is so severe with her? Probably because she wanted to prompt the women to fight more for their happiness. The heroine of the book is Elizabeth, not Charlotte. We then see the love between Jane and Bingley. Although this is more of a mature feeling than Lydia, something's wrong even here. Lydia is probably incapable of showing her feelings. Or she confides too much to the manners of the society that demand on her to keep her feelings for her. Bingley gives up asking her hand just because Darcy says so. I'm sorry, what kind of love story is this? That your friend comes up saying no, you should not marry her, and you actually don't marry her? In the end, we have Elizabeth and Darcy. Their love is definitely hindered by the pride and prejudice they have on each other. It seems, anyway, that this love relies more on mutual respect than just feelings. Their love for each other lays the road for a happy marriage because they both respect each other as people. All in all, anyway, the book ends with marriage as a finish point, when we all know that marriage is a starting point in your life. This can be probably caused by the fact that even if Austen was an acute observer of the society, she never got married. She never had what her heroine looked for so hard. In the end, she wrote about something that she never had. To her view, marriage is the highest point of a life of a woman, and it's better if there's love in it, as it at least becomes more pleasant to live, since every woman needs to get married to survive that society. Despite her dying at a very young age, Austen indeed wrote some timeless classic that also inspired more books around her personality and her characters. Still, I think sometimes she's deeply misunderstood, as too many only stops at love stories. When the love story is just the tip of the iceberg, as there is so much more that she meant when writing that it's really degrading to think of her as just a romance writer. There are a few films adaptations and a TV series particularly famous, as the actor who plays Mr. Darcy is Mr. Colin Firth. The film, though, is very different from the book. Firstly, because it doesn't respect the chronology of the events. And secondly, because the director has preferred the wonderful British landscapes as set of the scenes to the classic salon in which the action takes place in the book. The TV series seems to be more accurate, but I must confess that I don't know, because I've never watched neither of them, as I must confess that among all the authors of English literature that I've studied, Austen is my least favorite. We clearly are on two different sides of the road, as one of the books that has been published posthumously, Northanger Abbey, is a mockery to the Gothic genre so popular at the time. But if you want to share your opinion about the book, about the TV series, about the film, please feel free to do it down in the comments, because I would really like to see your opinion. So thank you very much for watching this video. If you like it, please give it a thumb up. If you want to see more videos about literature and history, please subscribe to the channel. Remember, we are a language school. We teach English, French, Spanish and Italian for foreigners. We are just outside Milan. We teach teenagers and adults, and we deliver lessons online as well as in presence. If you want to follow us on the social media, this is our Facebook page. This is our Instagram page. This is our email address. You can write to us and ask any question that you want about literature or about English courses. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope to see you soon with another Literature Snacks or another History Sparkle. Bye bye!